Welcome to JGTCR, I'm Cope, and today we are tuning the Audi TTS Coupe 14. Let's get into it. The drive feel of this Audi is quite nice. The suspension is a touch soft, but works well. The steering is very agile and sharp, so it responds to our steering inputs considerably well. However, it does have a tendency to understeer, especially when pushing too hard going in or out of turns. This understeer can be defeated by braking well before the corners, setting up to take the turns appropriately, and easing onto the throttle on corner exit. The power provided is decent, and delivery of that power is relatively solid, but as previously mentioned, that power must be put down correctly to be effective. There is quite a lot of torque available, especially in the mid to mid-high rev range, and this is where the understeer can really damage our lines. So it's best practice to use a higher gear and let the bottom end do the work. The brakes work considerably well, but can cause the tail end to step out if we are too aggressive. Braking and turning is acceptable if used sparingly, but even a touch too much pressure on the brake and we're going sideways. Let's jump ahead and collect our time. (7 minutes 44.2 seconds). Let's take a look at the tune. Our tune focused on removing some of the understeer characteristics that were amplified after modification. The suspension sees softer front settings, while the differential sees acceleration and braking sensitivity both reduced to 30 points. This worked well enough to make the understeer manageable, but it would not hurt to add some extra front downforce if understeer is still an issue. An extra 20 to 30 points should suffice. Let's hit the track. When completely modified, the Audi TTS Coupe 14 had some issues with understeer. While the default settings worked well, at speed, the front end of the vehicle did float around quite a lot. With some simple tune methods, we were able to iron out the kinks. This Audi now zigs and zags as requested by our inputs. While moments of understeer are less frequent, they do still occur. However, this is more based on torque and power delivery. If we are reasonable with throttle inputs while cornering, this Audi's handling remains solid. While the power comes on mildly aggressive and can cause understeer, when managed properly, it comes on steady and strong with aggressive pull right the way through the rev range. The brakes have improved quite a bit and now keep this Audi very stable under braking, so it is now able to hold up to some fairly decent punishment. Let's head to the checkered flag and collect our time. 6 minutes 34 seconds flat. On to the drift tune. For our drift tune, we soften the rear suspension settings, maximize the rear camber settings, and have the body height adjustment lower at the rear than the front. This gives us far better directional drift. Our differential settings are completely maxed, and our front-rear torque distribution is biased completely to the rear. Let's drift Suzuka. The Audi TTS Coupe 14 drifts just as well as any of the other TT chassis we have tested so far. Each may have its own quirks, but ultimately they are the same. The drift itself does feel more like floating than driving, and this sensation certainly isn't everyone's cup of tea. There is a certain chuck it at the corner and see what happens feel that we get from this Audi, but it does end up making the drift feel a little artificial. The handling itself is flexible enough to adapt to most driving styles. The vehicle can be placed on the track relatively well, and is reasonable to mid-drift adjustments to a degree. The aggressive nature of the power delivery actually works in this Audi's favour, making it capable of drifting at most rev ranges. Higher RPM increases the arc of the drift, but increases the likelihood of understeer. If we are after the most control while drifting, it's best to stay at low RPM at a higher gear. When settled into a drift at a consistent RPM, the drift can be decent, but when we make adjustments to speed, line or angle, that's when it can all fall apart. Time for the engine swap. The Audi TTS Coupe 14 with just the engine swap handles exceptionally well, especially when compared to other engine swap vehicles. The weight balance of this Audi has been thrown out, but it is manageable. The new drive feel of the vehicle can take some getting used to. As it lurches more when turning, it can cause more sliding than usual. The new power is good, but the engine does feel lazy. Even when at high RPM, the engine sounds like it's sleeping. As it was with the factory engine, low RPM is best for cornering and maintaining traction. When traction loss does occur, as with the factory engine, the result is understeer. So we can use the same techniques to maintain control of the vehicle. However, it will feel far more cumbersome as the presence of the additional weight certainly makes itself known. That additional weight also makes braking far more difficult, so be sure to adjust braking markers as slowing down takes much more time. In addition to this, when braking heavily, the tail end is far more prone to stepping out. This means we must be far more calculated with our braking and adjust accordingly. Let's collect our time. "7 minutes 28 seconds flat. Onto the tune. Again, we are dealing with understeer, so the tune reflects our best efforts to reduce that. Our suspension setup sees the body height adjustment lower at the front than at the rear, and most of the front suspension is softer than the rear. Our differential settings are mostly maxed, except for acceleration and braking sensitivity, which are both reduced to 20. We have also changed our front-rear torque distribution to be 30-70. Our front downforce was bumped up to 100, and we also added ballast of 30 points at a ballast positioning of -25 over the front wheels. And with our understeer issues mostly under control, let's hit the track. When completely modified, the engine-swapped Audi TTS Coupe 14 becomes a firecracker, packed full of explosive potential, just waiting for the perfect opportunity to be unleashed. The understeer and torque-steer nature of this vehicle was prone to pulling us right off the track, so it was abundantly clear that this car was in desperate need of rebalancing. A good part of this was rebalancing the four-wheel drive system to be more rear-wheel drive biased. With less pressure being sent to the front wheels to put power to the ground, it was now far more capable of actually steering the car. While the handling is far better, there is still mild understeer that occurs from time to time. And with more power being sent to the rear wheels, tail slides are more likely to occur, but fortunately they are extremely manageable. The power delivery is very strong and unwavering. It is steady and reliable with plenty of pull. It really comes down to us wielding that power appropriately. The brakes do still take a while to slow the vehicle down, but generally speaking, are good and work well. However, the tail end does still like to step out on heavy braking, so proceed with caution. Let's collect our time. 6 minutes 18.6 seconds. Onto the drift tune. The engine swap did a number on the weight balance of the vehicle, but despite our best efforts with ballast, we were unable to level off the weight balance and have positive results. As such, we abandoned the use of ballast and hung all of our hopes and dreams on the suspension setup. Our body height adjustment sees the front higher than the rear, and our anti-roll bars are set quite high. This is to try and stop aggressive weight shift. The natural frequency is softer at the rear than at the front, and the negative camber angle at the rear is set to the maximum of 6. This is to try and get more traction while drifting, so we can actually make it around the corner instead of flying off the end. Our differential settings are all completely maxed, and the front-rear torque distribution is completely biased to the rear at a 5:95 ratio. Let's go drifting. It would be easy to draw the conclusion that more power means an easier drift, but this is not always the case, and the engine-swapped Audi TTS Coupe 14 is a perfect example of just that. While the additional power is great for initiating drift and getting us out of trouble with some low-end torque, there are some cons that outweigh the pros. All of that power is constantly trying to pull the front of the car straight. And no matter how we play with those diff settings, that pull power remains constant. At the mid to high RPM, this Audi becomes very understeery, making it a risk to go wide open throttle. And if we can't effectively use part of the rev range, we may as well not have it. When we remain in the lower half of the rev range, there is a decent amount of control. With calculation and precision in our driving, we can do a decent drift pass. But should we need to make quick or last minute adjustments, there is a high chance our flow will be interrupted and our ability to recover smoothly is very slim. So despite all of the power available, it is very difficult to drift well. The Audi TTS Coupe 14 is a reasonable vehicle in factory trim. It is smooth and agile, even if the power is a little lackluster. When completely modified and tuned, it springs to life. With more power and agility available, it cuts down lap times to size. As a drift car, it certainly is capable, but it's clearly not a fan. When engine swapped, the chassis handles it better than most other swapped vehicles. It is faster, but also heavier, which makes slowing down take longer and weight shifts far more aggressive. When completely modified and tuned, the engine swap version of the Audi TTS Coupe becomes lightning quick. With decent handling and a lot of power, this is the fastest this chassis will go. But as a drift car, the engine swap version is troublesome, and while it can be drifted, it won't make it easy for us. So on drift days, it's probably best to leave this one parked in the garage. And that's all we have for you today, so until next time, keep racing.